Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off.
Welcome back. Episode 18, Propellers. Joe, you and I are going to take a little bit of time here and talk about the last piece of the power system in an RC airplane. But before we do that, I definitely want to have us sit down and let's talk about our flying stories and our building stories. Joe,
Okay.
what did you build and fly this week? Was the past couple weeks?
I have flown nothing, sadly. I know we talked about me going up to see you, hang with you for a bit, and do some flying up at your place. After, and we'll talk about the build party in a second, but after the build party, I was then going to drive up the next day and see you. And the weather had just been real rough down here leading up to the weekend, and then
it almost felt like either New England or Seattle weather. It was just kind of gray and overcast and lightly raining for days.
Yeah, it was, I won't say it was weird. I mean, it's that time of year, but
I mean, for us here, most of the time a storm is in, and in about 4 hours at most, it's out.
Yeah. Anyway, but we also knew that the next day, A, was going to be cold, which doesn't bother me, but because the storm or the front that was bringing that rain all week had just hung out and hung out and hung out. So when it finally left, the next day was going to be crazy windy. And it was. Like, it wasn't windy to the point that you couldn't fly, but we'd have had a rough time of it, and we just opted to not. So, no, I don't have anything I've flown.
When you were going to come up, that next day, by the time we would have gotten our planes ready and out to fly, it would have been 17 miles an hour. It was like the universe was conspiring against us. We had, over here, we had a surprise birthday party that was exactly at the time that would be good for us to fly. I had my mother coming to town the previous weekend, and so I was just kind of rearranging for some of that stuff. And while that makes some of it easier, it also makes some of it a different kind of challenge. So, it just didn't work out. But we did get to the build party, right? So we did pull out our building tables and our foam and our RC projects, and we started working on them.
And by pull out the building table, my wife was actually out of town that weekend, so I kind of had the house to myself. So my building table was the kitchen counter by the stove, both sides of the stove, actually the stove itself, the dining room table. Like, I got the opportunity to really, really spread out. Yeah, I wasn't confined to my little, but 6 foot fold out table that's here in the man cave that, isn't necessarily flat all the way across.
Well, any of those plastic folding tables, what you need to do is get like a hollow core door, like one of those hexa. What the heck are they? They're like an accordion hexa filled, so they're
I know what you're
flat
talking about,
and straight. Yeah, get a hexacore door to put on top of that and screw that down on the corners, and then I think you'll be in good shape.
Again, eventually, I'm going to build a Murphy table in the garage, but eventually. So
build it like a torsion table with you have the springs spring loaded or counterweighted, and if you do it like a torsion table, that thing will be flat, dead flat forever. Those are awesome.
I may have to look at that because my plan really is to maybe 2 layers of plywood so it can be a little sturdier, run some bracing underneath of it, then put all that on a hinging mechanism with wires run down at an angle to absolute bottoming out, but then also have some fold out legs for actual support along with the cable. And then when I'm done, I can just push it up against the wall, fold the legs in, pull down a latch, and it holds it up against the door.
Yeah.
But a build party of a different sort one of these nights. But so yeah, we had the build party. I pulled out the Corsair speed build kit, and
well, now that's
got a little ways
mighty.
into it.
Is that the Mighty Mini or is that the Master Series?
That would be the Master Series. Yeah, and I don't know why I thought I was remotely going to get that plane done in a night, because I've never built any plane except for the FT Delta in a night.
Yeah, right.
And certainly, if I had paid attention and like really understood what all was going to go into the Corsair, I would have known. No, and really, all that I got built was the balsa. I got the foam spars glued to the balsa that was serving as the balsa part of the spars. So those two, and then I got the top of the wings glued on. I didn't even get the underside glued on yet. And the fuselage, like everything's popped out and loose and ready to go. Just it took a good while.
Build. It's an involved build in general. There's a lot more pieces than a traditional flight test build if you're not familiar with flight test stuff. Flight test pieces are maybe 20 to 30 pieces at most. Usually they're somewhere around 15 to 20. And honestly, they fold together almost like origami. It's usually pretty straightforward and simple. And the 15 pieces, most of them are like you laminate 3 or 4 pieces to build a nose piece, or there's a special little former on the top to roll the paper over. Like, and there's 6 of those. Like, okay, so that's half of your pieces right there. Most of it's pretty straightforward. The Master Series is more involved.
It is, because there was the whole delaminate one side and spend some time, working it across the right edge, the right angle edge of your countertop, and you kind of crushing the foam underneath of it so you can roll and curve it. And that was interesting. Like, I was aware that was something you could do, largely because I had heard you talk about the Master Series stuff before. I've looked into it a little bit. I've watched some videos on it, so it wasn't completely foreign, but actually getting into the process and doing it was an interesting experience. Like, I enjoyed actually working with it. It's something that's going to take some more time to do, but it's one that I think I want to take my time with and make sure that everything sits right, meets up right, that the final product's going to look good. And honestly, I may take the time to paint it and get it looking real nice before I ever maiden it.
I think you should. I think it'll be worthwhile. While your track record says you'll run it into something, and a tree is likely your culprit.
Thank you.
I'm just saying. Well, I think we're all kind of look. There's 2 things that are going to happen to your plane. Either you're going to be like me, where it's going to like roll over and tank straight into the ground nose first, and there goes your plane, which tends to be what I end up doing. But that's partly because when I fly, I'm in the middle of like a 40-acre field, so I don't really have too many trees to run into. I have a gantry system, maybe if I fly like almost a quarter mile away. So when I fly, I don't typically have too many trees that I'm in danger of hitting. That said, when I'm over at the school, I've hit all the things I shouldn't hit. I think I hit the goalpost at least once. Was it one of the lights along the entry road, power wires that cross over the entry road, because I was doing a limbo contest for myself. I know I've hit the bleachers at least 2 or 3 times. I almost shredded it through the fence at one point. Actually, 2 times. One was trying to get the 7 off the ground. I almost didn't get it off the ground high enough before it hit that.
I was there for that one.
Right. And then there's a fence on the other side of the field where I was gunning it and I was going, come on, baby. Almost. And then, So I just don't have as many opportunities, I think, as you have where you fly to come around through some trees. But don't get me wrong. This isn't a judgment. This is, I'm just saying this is likely to be one of the culprits for you. But anyway.
Yeah.
So, but that's okay. But like your flying is, from my experience, your flying is solid. enough where you're going to be able to fly it and enjoy it and really love it while it's, running well. So take the time, make it pretty.
I think I
That's my
will.
vote.
And having flown the Spitfire, which is a lot more responsive than, say, the Fogey ever was. I won't say than the Delta ever was, because I didn't fly it much, and that thing was crazy. Well, a few times I did get to fly it, but
Right.
it's having flown the Spitfire that is more responsive. I think hopefully when I do fly the Corsair that I'll have a better feel for it. I'll go gentler on the controls, until you really get the hang of it, and don't do the panic, pull the thumb down into the bottom right corner to pull out of some situation. Actually assess what's happening and get yourself out of it.
Right. And start off on lower throws. Don't do me and start off like full throws as much as you can. Cause I always like when I started, I assumed that every plane is going to aim straight for the ground and I'm going to have to recover within seconds. So I need all the throw I can get, which that's like the opposite. That's the opposite of what you should be doing. So, I'd overcorrect a ton and half the time I'd cause my own problems. But yeah, if you start out with low throws, you should be in good shape to just enjoy it.
Yeah, I think I'd have to actually pull my transmitter out and have a look, because all my throws are really set the same. The throw reductions across all the models, because I end up just copying the one model and applying a new name and then setting up the new plane.
Yeah.
But they all have throw reduction. But I think low throws for me is like 70% of max, and then full throws is full range. And then it's really the gearing between the servo and the control horn that really sets, how big
it is.
That truly is.
That's essentially your base, and then from there you can fine tune it in the digital part of your radio. Which, yeah, you're absolutely right, and then ultimately that's going to be setting. And of course, Flight Test does provide gauges, so you can at least have a good idea as to where you can start and have it respond reasonably. Which I almost every time completely promptly ignore, but that's my own.
I remember cutting it out for the Spitfire and having it, and I remember actually cutting L and H for low and high into the block that I cut out that was supposed to be, and I remember it's somewhere around here, but I don't think I ever actually laid it on the wing to check the throws. I just said I got full and I got reduced.
It's fine. How was the build experience for the Corsair? I have built a couple Master Series models that I've designed myself, in that I used foam to curve and create smooth surfaces. I didn't do score cuts to kind of create the stepped wing. And so I understand the process, but I have yet to build a Flight Test Master Series model. And how would you say that experience was for you compared to the basic? I mean, you kind of covered it a little bit, but you want to go into what did you like about it, and what were you surprised about?
Well, that may be a question that's better returned to after I finish it, because again, I've only got the top half of the wings put on.
Okay, but so far, right? You've created the core of the wing, which is the spar and all the bracing in between. You've put the balsa on, and you've covered the top half, right? So when you hold it up, it looks like a Corsair wing.
Yeah,
from the top.
I like the appearance of that is curved as opposed to, you made your score marks and you kind of beveled them out, and so you've got the more angular airfoil, which is really the only thing I've built up to this point. And I'm looking forward to having a smoother airfoil. I kind of want to see how that handles differently, or if I'll even notice a difference in handling. It's, what's it going to do for the drag on the plane, and then I'd have to do the I'd have to do the Spitfire and then the Master Series Spitfire to really compare drag differences, or a non-Master Series Corsair of the same size. So really two that can line up side by side. But really, I was I was pleased with how easy really the curving of the foam was. And the kit's really set up nicely for this is where stuff goes. Like, it's got notches cut into the foam. Here's where your spars are going to go in. Like, you're not going to get that misaligned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as far in as I am, I don't have a whole lot to say other than I am enjoying the build. And I'm looking forward to finishing it up.
That's part of what I wanted to talk about, was just to capture your initial impressions, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to have another initial impression of a Master Series build again, right? So
it is... I'm glad that I started watching the build video before I started building. Yeah, I'd started watching the video earlier that day just to kind of get a heads up on what I was going into. So that then when I was kind of building, which part of it was we were going to be in the build party, so I didn't want to be watching a video while I was, hanging out with everybody. So, once I got going, if I needed to double check something, I could pull the video up and double check it and make sure. But yeah, having looked through it once before, then when I was looking back through it again, like I was kind of, all right, I know where I'm at. I know when he's going to get there and what's coming up. It made things go smoother, I think.
Sure. Well, good. Cool.
And before we go on to your flight and build stories, since we did talk about the build party, I want to go ahead and say I quote unquote took attendance. I like to note who's there so we can say hey to those guys.
Yeah. Let's shout out.
Yep, you and I were there. Obviously, we had Apis, Sundown, Zediac, Oliver. We had the Hangar and the Hangar RC. So Sam and Sam.
Yep.
Griffler was there. Ketchup 51 and Battle Axe. All those being guys in the Discord server, and Ron and Tom came out for a little while as well.
Yep.
So everybody who came, thanks for coming out to the build party. I hope y'all had as much fun as we did.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I think, it's just going to be this thing where we build and there'll be people there, and then I'm like, no. We ended up getting into a handful of different conversations. Some of in the build night, people were sharing their experiences or sharing their build ideas, and then other parts of the night we were just talking about kind of where we've come from and how the heck we got into this a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then what we've liked about certain designs and what we didn't like. I was working, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but I was working a little bit on the Edward RC time save thing, the ERC time save thing. I had it up and running. I was doing my probably my first full sheet run of it. I had already tried it a couple times and it busted. I popped a needle, which isn't uncommon as we kind of figure out what works with something new and what doesn't. Nothing huge, but as I was rolling that, like people were asking questions about that, and it was just neat because we were talking about like there's a lot of people who had their eyes on it. There's a couple people who had the parts and pieces, and I think only one had it and had run or at least seen really been involved with getting one running. And it was neat, but we were sharing that kind of stuff and thinking about what would it be like to just say, hey, I want to build a plane tomorrow. Let me just run one off the press, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And then know that by the end of that day, that the next day you'd have a full set ready to go. So, yeah, it was pretty cool to just, I don't know, go back and forth and share the ideas. That's part of what I love. Again, I keep thinking we're going to go into this build night, and it's going to be Joe and I just talking, and each of us building a plane that we're, in the process of building one of our projects, right? And almost without fail, it turns into a whole different experience and a much better one, a lot more fulfilling for, I think, it seems like everybody seems to really enjoy just being able to be with people that love the hobby and just hanging out.
And it's a lot of hanging out, it's a lot of talking, there's a lot of sharing of ideas or asking questions. I think at one point, I know at one point there was some FPV goggle repair going on.
Yeah. I almost forgot about that.
Yeah. Sundown opened up his goggles. Was like, I don't think my antenna's supposed to turn like this. So
yeah, he was talking about how he was flying, and all of a sudden the image went dark, and he's like, "What the heck?" He brought the plane back, and he said, "I don't think this is what it's supposed to do." And then he brought it in, and then he's like, "Hold on, give me a second." He grabbed it. He started showing us what he was doing. I'm like, "Yeah, that's not supposed to. Like your antenna's not supposed to. Like the antenna might twist, but the base of it should be stationary. And
Yeah.
while it might move a little bit in the plastic casing, as the board may not be super fastened properly, but." We're like, yeah, it shouldn't be doing that. And he's like, oh, well, hold on, let me. And while we're all talking about other things, he cracks it open. He starts going, he's like, hey, check this out. And he holds it up to the camera. He's like, is this what it should look like? I'm like, no. I'd already broken open a couple of my goggles, and I have actually one where it's just a screen, a board, and the connectors and stuff. And so I'd seen what goes into making one of those goggles from just the parts that I'd purchased. So I was like, oh, it looks like this, and it solders like that. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. So then he went and,
grabbed his soldering iron.
Yeah, he's like, hold on. And then, of course, we talked about our Halloween scare story. You're like, whatever you do, when you're done, unplug it, please. And then anyway, so then, short order, he had it up and running. He's like, thanks a lot, guys. And I'm like, dude, I'm excited that we were able to help.
Yeah.
Get it running.
Kidding.
Yeah.
And, props to him on those soldering skills.
Yeah, better than I could do. Okay, so what I ended up doing was after we did the FAA episode and we're talking about all the different restrictions and all this stuff, and I don't know that we really covered it or there's much of a question, but basically if you as a recreational pilot still qualify to fly under the recreational pilot rules, which I believe I was going to say it's like part 349 or 350 or something like that. But there's a recreational flying rules section that still pertains to if you're flying for education or recreation. And these remote ID rules sit kind of on top of it. And you can be exempt if you go under 250 grams. So in that vein, I said, well, what can you do under 250 grams? And I know that that's not a new question, right? But I had ordered the Zod Copilot Lite. Matter of fact, that'll go into one of our listener questions. But I looked at this system, and the system kind of allows some autonomous flying in the sense that it's a stabilizer GPS unit, has a return to home. You can put a little bit of kind of smartness into it. Nothing huge, but it's enough where it allows you to make it more of an FPV platform for enjoyment and scenery looking rather than strictly flying, right?
Okay.
So I said, if I can make this under 250 grams, maybe I can get like a long range system and a good FPV system. And, that's something I could just bring out and fly as long as it meets all the other requirements. I won't need to put this, locator unit in it, and I'll just go, that's something I could just bring. So XJet, which is Bruce, he's down in RC Model Reviews is his other site. He's very well known in the industry, and he basically did a lot of great reviews. He's been in the hobby forever. I think he ended up creating like a homemade heat-seeking missile, something like that. He's like, this isn't that hard to do. Like anybody can do this. Like, this isn't crazy. I'll show you. And he went and he built one. And of course the governments are all like, no, what are you doing? Anyway, that's his story to tell. But anyway, so he ended up showing, he had a video shortly after we put out the FAA episode or that day or something on how to put together 250 gram build. And so what I did is I just said, well, what is it? His phone was going to be a little different than ours. And I said, maybe I could fit the Zod Copilot in there. All right, let me see what I can do. So I started fashioning one. And it's basically like a plank wing with a small tail. It's fairly short coupled. I'm putting a 2205, 2300 kV motor, which is like the F-Pack for flight test. I'm using a 6x4 prop, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm using a 6-channel standard light 6-channel receiver. There's a 20 amp ESC that's from, was it between 2 to 4 cell LiPo capable. It's small, it's lightweight. And all of this stuff in 3 servos, 3 plastic 9-gram servos. Actually, no, 3 plastic 5-gram servos. I forgot. I had ordered, when I had made an order over the holidays, I had ordered a couple 5-gram servos, knowing that as we try to make some light builds, and the motors that I purchased during that original purchase, they were set up for like smaller builds. I wanted to have some reliable 5-gram motors or 5-gram ESCs with that to keep it light. And then I have the TX06 eSheen cameras that are like super small and super lightweight. And I 3D printed an adjustable case with a base. And so I've got it generally set up. I've got to test the Copilot system. I'd originally put it together and I tested it. And what I've learned as I've continued to move through it, the channel settings are very specific. It's AETR settings. So what your transmitter is sending out has to be in that format, or it doesn't know what to do with it.
That makes sense.
It does. And I went through and tried to get it working. It didn't work. I put all that stuff away. I looked at that video and went, oh, I'll have to get back to that. And I haven't. I've been busy doing other nonsense. So anyway, so we'll get to that eventually here. Hopefully this week or early next week. And it comes in at like just at 250 grams. And one of the things is the F-Pack motor is heavier than, let's say, it's a 2205 racer, like 2300 kV motor. I can use an 1806 motor instead, and that should function just as well, and it'll shave off maybe 10 grams. I also did not remove any paper in between the layers of the KFM wing. So it's a KFM style wing. Where the two pieces join, I don't need paper there. I don't need additional strength in the center of the beam. That's where there's no stresses, right? The stresses are on the exterior, top and bottom of the wing, if you're going to flex it. So I'm safe to remove that. It's not adding or reducing any strength, but it will save me a third of the weight of the foam board in that section, which, let's say it's a full 30 inches wide by 3.5 inches deep. So I think I ended up figuring out it's like another 10 grams.
Now you're using hot glue to do that KVM wing.
As little as I can get away with. Now I could change that. I could use like the polyurethane glue, like a Gorilla Glue,
right?
Or I could use another. I could probably use super glue, which maybe not the best solution, but when super glue dries, it weighs almost nothing because all the liquid evaporates and what's left is the adhesive, and the adhesive weighs almost nothing. Whereas what you're putting in with the hot glue, that doesn't evaporate. It's not liquid. It's not water, so it's there. So whatever you put on, it's stuck.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking into, say, some aliphatic resin solutions to the.
It's aliphatic. Say it again, Joe. That's so beautiful.
Aliphatic.
So what is that in layman's terms?
Wood glue. As I understand it. Sorry, that is for two people specifically.
Yeah, right. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I just used a little bit of hot glue. So that's another place I can save a little bit of weight. I think I used maybe 5 grams or so, maybe 8 grams of hot glue. I really kept it to a minimum, and I don't... Again, we're shaving right now. I think if I weigh it now with a 450 milliamp 3-cell battery, which I could do a larger 2-cell battery, which would likely still do fine. Because as I understand it, like the 2205 it's probably like a 3 or 4 to 1 thrust ratio. So it's, I think it's got over a kilogram of thrust, and this plane weighs 250 grams, right? So that's like a
Yeah.
4-to-1 thruster. It's ridiculous. Way overpowered, right? Even if I put it on 2S, I think it would still be at like a 2 or 2.5 to 1 thrust ratio.
Yeah,
which
you're
is
not looking to necessarily do crazy acrobatics with this thing.
No, but I mean, it should be able to, and I should be able to have a lot of fun. The goal would be to have an FPV flat platform where if I have the extra 5 grams or 6 grams or whatever I need, is to hopefully hook up one extra servo to do a pan or some. A pan is really what I need. I don't need a tilt, and to really enjoy it as an FPV ride along, I guess, flying system, right? Which would be the kind of point. Anyway, so the first attempt is there. If I'm over 250 grams, it's just barely. We'll get into some more details about the Zod Copilot. I think overall, the thing weighs about like 25 grams total. So I could pull that out, and that would decrease the weight on the plane by that much as well. So there are definitely easy ways to get well under 250 grams. But I'm trying to do it so that I have kind of a backup system.
Right.
And then in the build party, I got the Edward RC time save working. So that's basically the CNC needle cutter. It's basically almost like a sewing needle on a CNC gantry. And so basically you give it three depth cuttings, and it's got an RC motor that you set to the right revolutions, the right speed, basically. And it's like a sewing machine. There's basically a needle just goes up and down. And as it travels, it cuts the foam at the depth that the program identifies.
Did you ever get that app downloaded that Sundown told you about?
No, thank you for the reminder. Yeah, it was an RPM measurement thing that you can do with your phone.
Yeah.
And so thank you.
As he explained it, and I can't remember the name of the app, honestly. But I know you were looking at it, so it might be in your history. But it is an app that uses the flash on your phone you can set a flash frequency or flashes per minute or whatever. But that was his solution for you not having any sort of an RPM tachometer.
Yeah,
was to use this app that you can have on your smartphone that just flashes your phone's flash at the frequency, which blew my mind that there was an app like that, but it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, and I think it was like a tachometer or something like that. I'm not going to look for it now, but just know that there's one out there. Look for it, and you might find it. But anyway, so I got that working. So I put down the previous day. I had done sheet 1 of the FT Duster. So in the previous week, I had watched Planes and Planes 2 between my kids, and looking for a movie to just relax with my girlfriend. And so I watched both of the airplanes. I was like, wait, I need to make it dusty crop hopper. It's time.
Now is Planes that like Pixar movie or something?
Yeah, the Planes Pixar movie. And Flight Test had done the whole series. They'd done the FT Racer, which is based off of the movie. That is
right.
Rip Slinger. And you got Dusty, right, who's the crop hopper. That's almost like a 3D plane with like a little bit lower, like they move the 3D wing down, except it's not a symmetrical wing, but it's, same idea. I think the FT Cruiser is the English plane. I can't remember what the heck that guy's name is in the movie. They made a Cabby, which is the cargo plane that they used in the fire and rescue one. I know they made like the high engine twin single fuselage boat plane. I know they made that, at least in one of the videos. I don't know if they released the design. I'm trying to remember. Oh, and the FT, there's a Long Easy. One of the planes, I think it's the Indian plane or the Canadian plane, looks like an Long Easy by Burt Rutan.
Okay.
So you could like scale that up to kind of match the scales and just fly that too. And then you do every one of them up like the ones in the planes, and all of a sudden you got a whole armada of cute, fun to fly planes that people will recognize. So I thought, let me see. The plans were already set up, right? That's part of the thing about being part of the ERC time save community. You already built one of these things. There's a number of people who have taken some of the FT plans and already set up the files. So all you have to do is download those files all ready to go, dump them in the program, and start cutting. And that's kind of what I was doing. So I'd done sheet 1 the previous day, and the needle broke like 70% of the way through the sheet, through the cut program. So I was like,
Right.
well, I can hand cut the rest of that. And that's what I did part of the build night while sheet number 2 was coming out of the time save. And that came out just fine. It was a little bit rough. So I think I either have the speed too fast or the RPM's not set right. And I went out and I ended up getting a loop pliers to make my own needles and some extra wire to be able to make a bunch, because I'm like, if this keeps happening, I want to at least be able to make a couple extra needles on demand as I need it.
Right.
But I got all of the foam cut out and put together. I'm showing Joe, what it looks like, what Dusty Crop Hopper looks like. And
yeah, he looks pretty good.
yeah, it turned out pretty good. I think the only thing I don't have the paper, but I think I'm going to actually use foam board instead of the poster board. So that shouldn't be a big deal. And then I'm going to go fly it later this week. I thought I'd get further along this past week, and I just didn't. But that's what I worked on the build night, and that's what I've been working on here. A couple days ago, I ended up taking, because I had those 5-gram servos, I replaced one of the 5-gram servos that was busted in the Mini, the 50% HRC RV7.
Okay.
The Hanger RC's RV7. Remember, I built that 50% one? Well, I still had it ready to go. And so I pulled out the 5-gram that was busted. I put in the new one. And I flew that for a little while. It acted really tail heavy, which was disappointing, but it sounds to me like I think I crashed it a couple times, and I think I need to do some repair work on the cowl. Once that's done, I'll go back out again, because otherwise the rest of the plane's intact.
Okay.
And including the motor and the prop. I used it's an F-Pack and like a 2204, 2300 kV motor running on a 3-cell, again, a 450 milliamp 3-cell battery. I think it's running on 12 amps, which might be dangerous. The ESC might be right at its edge. But I'm using a prop. It's a 5x3 prop. And it's made for quadcopters, so it's like stupid durable. You're good luck really busting that one. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So I flew that, and I also finally connected, and a lot of people don't really know, but I've been trying to get into flying quadcopters. So I will get on different simulators and kind of practice flying quadcopters. But I ended up purchasing a Diatone Tina Whoop. It's basically one of those 3-inch ducted fan cinematic whoops, so that I could follow Joe. I figured, Joe, when you start pulling out the FT Spitfire and you start getting into the air, I could hopefully, throw on the goggles for that bad boy and follow and get some chase footage.
Now, what is a whoop?
Well, a whoop is like almost like an indoor size where you're looking at 2-inch to 2.5-inch. It's almost toy grade. The thing weighs maybe 25 to 30 grams total. I think not counting the battery. And it's got a full flight controller board and all that kind of stuff. This one is basically similar to that, a little heavier. And it's like beefed up motors. Like they're the, I guess you call it flight tests, HPAC motors. They're like 1104 motors. They're stupid fast. They have 3-inch props, and they have these big ducted fans, so that way you can't like hurt anybody when you run into them. If you do, knowing me, I might. And I just figured that would be something I wanted to have in our arsenal, especially as maybe we get better and have a little bit more fun chasing each other and creating maybe a couple of videos for our listeners here and just for ourselves. One of the things was I did the FR Sky built-in module. Like I ordered it with the FR Sky module in it. FR Sky has had, I'll call it contention with Jumper. Now, I've got the Jumper T16 with the 4-in-1 module. The 4-in-1 module transmits FR Sky protocol, but the updated protocol on the Jumper is blocked by the new FR Sky receiver modules. So remember, I pulled out the long range module out and I put in the old 4-in-1 module that came with the Jumper. We had talked last time where basically I had put the internal 4-in-1 module on the Jumper T16, and I've updated that hardware. So I've updated the chip stuff and the software on that. But I took out the old module because I didn't need it, because it's all internal now. But when I put it back in, because we were going to do the buddy box testing, and I was going to do the wireless buddy box testing, what I found was that the old module has the 2.4, and I think the new stuff has 3.6 is the version of software on it. So the old module still talked to the FR Sky. The FR Sky module, receiver module in the quad, could talk to the old transmitter module, 4-in-1 transmitter module that I had. So I was able to finally bind the darn thing. So that was the thing, is I had it all set up. It was all working. I was ready to go. And I could not, and this is just my life, but I could not bind the dang, I could not bind the thing. I'm like, this radio says it works. And of course, I'm talking to the Race Day Quads is the people I bought it from, and they were great. Their support was very on top of it. They had reached out to me. They had got me as many answers as they could find. They were open to dude, call me when you get back into it and all this stuff. And I think Joshua Bardwell had a thing on how they're not talking, and there's a workaround. And I think they even sent me that video. And I just said, maybe I'll get back to it later. So I did. It's working now. It's connected. I went out and flew it. And so I flew the 2 batteries. So I flew what was left of the HRC7, because it's the same battery size. And then I had an extra battery. So I flew that. I literally just up and down the field and did, whirly gigs and zoopity doops. And what I didn't have was, I forgot my goggles, because I was just like, okay, sun's running out. I got to go. I left my goggles at home. So I'm like, oh no, line of sight. I am no good at line of sight. This is terrible. It turns out I had basically auto level mode on. And so I was able to fly around though, and I didn't lose control of it. I knew the cool part was I was able to fly around. So I was able to control it. I was able to fly out, turn around, come back, go up and down and around and all that stuff. And I was able to control it line of sight, which to me was like a big hurdle. That was pretty cool, because I was not able to do that before. And all that time in the simulators, I guess, helped out. Well, good. So I guess step number 2 is to put on the goggles and fly around and have fun with it that way.
Okay. You were talking about the jumper and the module and all that. I did get my new transmitter in. I got the Radio Master TX16S, and I did order in the 4-in-1. Apparently, the jumper 4-in-1 module is the same one you use in the Radio Master.
Yeah.
I have not been able to get it to bind with my Turnigy transmitter yet.
Okay, that's the 2A FH.
Yeah, it's running the. I think you said at the time it was the AFH DS2A, which is what, automatic frequency hopping digital signal 2A something. Anyway,
yes,
it's. I've not dumped a lot of time.
Not sure which. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've not dumped a lot of time into it. Just a few minutes here and there. So I need to sit down, but I was able to get hooked up to my computer, and I downloaded the software I need to be able to flash things on and off of it. So I've got all that. I just got to start trying to actually get it bound.
Okay, good. That'll work.
Nice. Yeah. So I think you had a listener comment come in, or a listener question. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I did. It was about I had mentioned the Zod Copilot Lite system that I had purchased, and I was looking to put it in this 250 gram plane, or at least it's something I was looking into putting in a plane. And I kind of went down some of the specs. And so Tracy Glenn reached out to us, and he said, and I quote, "I could be wrong, but I thought I heard one of you say in the last podcast that the Zod, Z-O-H-D is the brand, Dart 250G could be bought with an iNav-capable flight controller." And, that was me mistakenly identifying it that way. I do not believe that's the case. If I'm wrong, I'd love to know, because I would certainly buy one. All of the planes I currently fly are iNav capable, but I am not aware of any RC aircraft that comes with an iNav capable flight controller. I believe that always has to be installed afterwards. But if there is one out there, he says, but I would love to buy an aircraft with the capability already installed so that I don't have to solder it up, program it, and install it myself. Let me know. And then I kind of reached out to what the Copilot Lite is. I'm going to run down some basic specs here, so bear with me as I do that. It's okay. It's not where I thought it was. All right, so these are some of the features that it comes with. It's designed for fixed-wing RC, so FPV or line of sight. It's set up so you don't get too overwhelmed with all the iNav settings, because there's a high learning curve on that, as I understand it. There's a lot of options. And because of that, it's not always the easiest to get installed and working the way you want, because,
Right.
Let's face it, it's running automatic flight paths and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So you don't have hundreds of pages of how-tos and stuff that you have to read or anything like that. The whole point is the Copilot Lite is basically you plug it in, you tell it, here I am, here's the GPS, and I think you can basically identify how far out you want your fence to be from your start spot, and away you go.
Okay.
And again, that's part I'm not really certain about, but it tells me the features are easy installation, minimal wiring, and super easy setup. And honestly, that has literally been just a plug it in kind of thing. There's everything, all the components, which is a GPS, the settings module, and the base unit, and all the wiring is purely just, there's a plug. There's only one for each thing. So it makes it pretty straightforward. And there's even on the image on the front is basically, here's how to wire it. Makes it pretty simple. Has a powerful stabilization and a return to home algorithm. And the return to home, there's a fence or rad, and the stabilization modes go on a 3-position switch. It's your aux5, whatever you set that to be. It supports T-tail, V-tail flying, and flying wing or delta configurations. So it's pretty much most fixed-wing aircraft that you could select. It is a mini-sized GPS unit for ultralight setups, so it's really tiny and lightweight. It links to the satellites really quick, which I was able to confirm inside my house. I was able to link up pretty quickly. There's an adjustment board that you can pull out, so you can set it up really easy, but it's another way to pull out some extra weight. There's a launch assist and motor blocking for when there's no satellite fixes. There's also aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, and auxiliary to control for the servos. So that gets plugged into the board. Landing gear and flaps go straight to the RX, so you can still have them, but the autopilot doesn't control those. That's something you'll control like normal. And then it's computer free, so you don't need to be out there with your computer trying to figure out what's what and how to set up the system. And then it's easy to transfer from plane to plane. So you literally just pull the GPS unit and the base unit out and the plugs that go with those and move it to the next plane. And you can leave all the servo plugs and all that stuff that kind of go into the receiver. And basically you just disconnect the old receiver and connect it like you would normally put in, right? Okay. And it's completely transparent. It says switch it off and use it as a mixed board only if you want. So
all that is the Copilot system.
That is the Copilot system. And the Copilot unit weighs 12 grams and the GPS unit weighs 8. So add 5 grams for wires and you've got a 25-gram setup. which,
Okay.
not so shabby in my estimation. But I'm sure we'll see some incredible innovations in the next couple of years here for sure.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Yeah, I know
anyway, that's
that-
enough about the Zod pilot system. But basically, no, it is not iNav. That was my mistake. And then after a little bit back and forth of me admitting that to him and giving him some more details about what the Copilot Lite system is, he just said, "Hey, that would, if you guys are up for doing an episode on that I would love that." And I'll tell you what. When I go down, this is part of the RC Noob part. Like when I go down the iNav and Ardu Pilot, which is new to me, I'm happy to start covering it. It's going to be, it might be a mess, but you'll learn with me as we go.
Yeah, because I've got an Ardu copter sitting right here that I think I can flash Ardu Pilot onto.
Yes.
But I'm just not, I want to play with it, but I'm not there quite yet.
Yeah. Well, it would probably be a good one to do it with, especially if I get, able to just cut a bunch of those out, is, we knew the Spitfire is a great platform. Maybe worth putting it in there because the plane flies, like how it flies.
Yeah. Maybe.
It might be worth doing it on that. It's pretty straightforward. All right. Well, I guess that brings us to our main topic, right?
Well, before we do, quick little thing. Next episode, as a reminder, we're planning to do the year in review episode. So real quick, if anybody's got any questions that maybe they've been sitting on, please write in. Feel free to ask us. Questions about the last year for us in the hobby, or questions about the last year with the podcast, whatever you got. I know, Matthew, you and I are going to have some questions for each other. If you guys have any questions you want to ask, please feel free to write in because we'd love to talk about them.
Absolutely.
And since we have the new email addresses, you can get us at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com, or you can go to Matthew at aviationrcnoob.com or Joe at aviationrcnoob.com.
Excellent.
So yeah, we're talking about propellers today.
Yep, that's it. Propellers or air screws. And we'll learn why they might be called air screws in a little bit. So how about this? Why don't you tell me, Joe, what you know about propellers so far? As a noob, what have you picked up so far?
Absolutely everything. Everything there is to know about a prop, I got it.
Everything, huh? Nice.
Absolutely everything.
So I guess you got the episode. Sweet.
Yeah, sure. Prop, short for propeller. There's a couple numbers going on with them. Some will have say number X number. Some will have number X number X number. So that first number I know is going to be your diameter of your propeller. And then it'll be, say, X and then another number. Like I think I run 9x45s or 9x45, and that X45 is going to be your. It deals with the pitch, but that is essentially how far the propeller would screw through the air. So air screw. So it's screw through the air in one rotation. Now, how that equates into the angle that the blades are set at, couldn't tell you.
Right.
But the higher that number then becomes, presumably the steeper the pitch on those blades will be because you're trying to dig through more air in a given rotation. And then if it has that X and a third number, that's dealing with the number of blades on that propeller. So if you got an 11X4, X3, you're looking at an 11-inch prop, 4 inches of air screw, or 4 inches pitch.
What's the if there isn't one, if there isn't a number, how many blades is that?
Well, if it's just a 9x45, that's going to be presumably a 2-blade.
Yep. Yeah, it's 2 blades.
Or unless they came out with mono blades that I didn't know about. I don't know how you balance them.
Really? You have a mass on the other side. I'm trying to think. That is, I've seen that or heard about it as control line. So old control line planes, especially ones that are going, I think it's when you're doing speed records, they spin so crazy fast. What you don't want it to do is cut through turbulent air. And one of the ways you can stop from cutting through turbulent air is by having only one blade.
I thought you were pulling my leg just now.
I
but
thought I
just
was
Googled
pulling
it.
my leg when I saw that the first time. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
There it is. Yep, a single blade with a counterweight.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I would not remotely have guessed that there was actually a single blade prop out there.
Yeah, and you're talking like these things are spinning at obscene speeds. Like these motors are spinning stupid fast. Stupider fast. Way faster than some of the electric stuff. It's just wild. It's neat. Anyway, no, you got all that. That's the core knowledge. If you take nothing away from your, like, if you don't know anything about propellers and you only walk away from one thing with one thing from this episode, what Joe just explained, that's the core of it. That's essentially what you need.
Yep. And propellers are an airfoil.
They are an airfoil. Excellent job. Perfect.
Now,
what about the numbers?
I don't know how much of that your notes that took and crumpled up and threw out the window, but
they're over there. Yeah, it's in there. What about the little raised ridges? Like there's an identifying, label on the thing. How does that help you? Where that is? And it's kind of a leading question, but I think you know what it is. Like, how do you tell where the prop, how it goes on?
Oh, you're talking about what's the front of the propeller?
Yeah. How do you know which side's front?
I would not. I mean, I used to look at a prop and I know which way's forward. Like there's something to be said for one is a right hand turn or a left hand turn prop, but yeah, there's something about the texture. And I know you're getting at those raised numbers would then sit on the front of the prop.
Yeah, so the label is slightly raised and it sits on basically like the inside leading edge of the prop. And wherever those are, that's facing the front. So that's the direction the prop should be going to.
Unless it's a pusher configuration. No, even a pusher.
No, even a pusher. That tells you what direction the prop is going to produce thrust in.
That it's going to pull from that direction and push it the other way.
It's essentially producing. It's a producing lift in that direction, which is also big. But in the terminology we use as the overall plane, we call that thrust. But essentially, what you're doing is creating. There are wings. Your propeller is 2 wings, or 3 or 4, however many. But basically, they're wings that produce lift as they rotate.
Okay.
And as they produce lift, it essentially combines together as pulling or thrusting the plane in the direction of those letters.
Okay.
Yep.
I never looked at the numbers and such. I know you're trying to show me, but I know
it's not showing up. Yeah.
So like, I recognize that those numbers are there to their position there, so you can. I don't think I've ever used those numbers to determine the front of the propeller. There's a shape or a texture. Like I've just been able to look at my props and know which way of that prop is forward. Like there's just something.
Yeah.
If I held one in my hand, but I don't have one at quick access,
there's slightly.
You can kind of tell which one's the forward.
It's an airfoil. So either one side's flat. If it's like a Clark-Wise style airfoil, one side's flat and the other side's curved. The curved side is the direction the thrust is going. But if the whole thing is curved, you have basically a convex and a concave side. Okay, now my third grade confusion is coming back to me. The concave side is the back of the propeller, so the other side is where the thrust is going.
Yeah.
Yep. And if it has an R, what does that mean? Does that mean the propeller goes backwards? Like as in like
Uh,
it pushes backwards or something, or do you know what that R means?
that R is going to be for which direction that prop's turning. Now, I couldn't tell
Or
you if that
clockwise
means
versus
clockwise
counter?
or counterwise, but I know that denotes either like right hand or left hand turning. Because I know when I break my props, I've got, say, I think I tend to fly with R's just because I don't want to have to switch my motor. So I end up burning through a bunch of R's until all my R's are gone, and I'm like, okay, time to switch wires. Now I'll fly the L's.
Okay. Geez, I am having such a hard time reading this. This is I'm trying to see if this is it's a nope. I can't tell. It's
Matthew's holding up the mini HRC7 trying to read
a
the
really
little
tiny
raised.
writing on it. Yeah, this is not. It's a 5045C with another letter in front. And so if you're looking from the cockpit, the rotation is clockwise. But that seems backwards to me. I don't know why that seems backwards. I think I'm like in a full-size plane. Doesn't the prop, if you're sitting in the cockpit, if you're looking out, doesn't the prop turn counterclockwise? I can't remember. Anyway, in RC, it is important, especially as you get to the bigger craft, because most of those props only they're set up for gassers, and most gas engines only turn one way, unless you specifically buy a reverse turning, and that's what the R stands for, a reverse rotating shaft, like a gas engine. So it'll redo the timing so that the gas engine turns the other way. Now that's really useful when you're doing a twin engine plane and you want counter rotating props where they're going opposite directions. And what that does is the torque from the one motor eliminates the torque from the other because they're opposite directional torques. So they're both twisting the plane opposite ways. They end up doing nothing when they combine. They cancel each other out. So when you have a twin prop and they're counter rotating, they are it's a smooth flight. You don't have any weird turning tendencies or anything like that. Like
That
you
makes
would
sense.
for like the Spitfire wants to do a bunch of things because torque roll and air flow pushing on the rudder and a bunch of other things we talked about the other time. Contra rotating propellers or is basically two propellers on inline shafts that are going opposite directions.
Which is a whole nother mess of a motor that I'm not
Yeah.
looking
We're
to
going to
get
leave
into.
that for a different day when we want to talk about something as crazy as like the Bugatti, or there's a handful of like turboprop planes that have two propellers on the same, they're not the same shaft, but they're inline shafts that rotate opposite directions. And we can talk about why we do that some other day, but today we'll leave that where that lay. How many blades can you get on a prop, do you think? And what's the advantage of having more and what's the advantage of having less? Do we have any ideas or do we want to?
Per our discussions before we got into recording, I know that we can go up. Well, we found up to 6. You may know of more. 6 blades on a prop. Now, why there's an advantage, more blades versus fewer, I don't know, because I know when you go to more blades, you've got to size down the prop overall. So, no, I don't. Right. You'll have to tell me the advantage of having more blades.
The fewer, all I know is, at least through quadcopters, the fewer the blades, the more efficient the prop, so it's cutting through cleaner air. So part of the propeller, the more blades you have, ends up actually cutting through some of the turbulent air from the previous airfoil or the previous blade.
Okay.
So it ends up being less efficient, but you have more propellers cutting through the air, so it's grabbing hold of more air. So it ends up producing a little bit more thrust, but it ends up being less efficient.
Okay.
It also ends up being quieter with more props, generally speaking. That's not always true, but generally speaking.
I was about to say that 3-blade you had on that Goblin made quite a racket.
That's because it was going really. It would have been worse with a 2-blade. No, but so I ran the FT Goblin with the 6-blade that I had, or the 5-blade prop that I have, and it was like quiet. I was like, as opposed to that 3-blade was whining like it was angry, like an angry baby.
An angry goblin.
Exactly, right? Okay, so let's talk about, so you covered all the basics really well. I think the only thing I want to add to that is maybe 3 things. Let's talk about the anatomy of the prop, right? You have a hub or the boss, which is basically the center of it. You have the root, which is typically at the center, like right outside the hub. And then you have the tip. And you still call the width of the blade, you still call it a chord because it's an airfoil.
Okay.
And I think the only difference is that in basically the angle of attack of that blade, or basically of that airfoil, changes as it goes from root to tip. And so as it goes, so it starts off really steep, and as it goes out to the edge, it becomes more flat, like a traditional wing, let's say, at whatever kind of pitch we're aiming at. Do you know why that might be happening? You want to take a guess?
Okay. My initial, I have 2 initial thoughts on that. One being that as you're getting farther out from the hub, from the shaft of the motor, your travel distance is greater compared to further closer to the shaft of the motor. So it doesn't need to be so steep an angle of attack to get the same amount of thrust, as it were.
Right.
The further you go out, the longer the blade, the faster it's cutting through the air. So it doesn't need to be angled so harshly. The other thing that...
Think about a regular plane. Like, if it's slow, you can put it at a pretty high angle of attack, and it'll just kind of putter through the air. But if you're going really, really fast, that's not going to work. Like, you got to angle it pretty level. The angle of attack changes as you increase your speed.
Yeah. The other thing that's just when you asked a question that came to mind is why it would be angled different, so steep at the root. Is it for strength purposes of being able to hold that blade as it's rotating, because you're putting a lot of torque on it, or a lot of rotational tension on it as you're swinging that blade?
Yeah, I think that's the other half of it. Usually it's pretty thick at the base, and it's really, really, really thin. Because, again, you have a certain amount of mass you want to move, and if you have a ton of mass at the ends of the propeller, that's going to create a lot of strain on along the propeller length, right?
Okay.
So you kind of want to taper it and feather it out as you go out to the tips. I mean, that's you pretty much hit it right on the nose, which is great. That's if there's more to it, I don't know. And maybe we'll discover it as we learn more about other kinds of propellers, and we talk about when we talk about the contra-rotating props and things like that one, because that's going to get into a whole special set of details. Okay, good. Let's talk about pitch.
Okay.
Right. You covered it pretty much. The pitch is how far the propeller will screw into the air at the angle it's at in one rotation of the blade, or one full rotation of the propeller. And so basically, when you have a high pitch prop, the properties are basically, it's usually a high speed flight. It'll have very poor acceleration and probably poor climb. And it can be difficult to slow down when you're coming in for landing and stuff. But whereas a low pitch prop, it'll have a lower overall flight speed, but it'll have really good acceleration and good climb. And there'll be a lot more control. You have a finer speed control through the throttle range. particularly at the low speed setting. So you have a better control with the lower pitch. But if you want to go fast, you're not going to get it with that 10 by 4.5 slow fly prop. There's a reason why they call it a slow fly prop. You're never going to get going very fast with it because it only bites so much into the air.
Mm-hmm.
And think of it this way. One of the analogies I saw, which I thought was pretty good, the low pitch propellers are like the low gear in your car. So you're going to be able to, it'll go up your hills and it'll take you almost anywhere, but it won't be very fast, right? You'll be stuck in low gear. High pitch is basically you being stuck in fifth gear, right? So it'll take forever to get there, but when you do, you're going to be moving fast.
I don't know that I ever want to quit flying the slow fly props, and I can't imagine putting a prop that's going to double the speed of that Spitfire. That'd be
right.
So
right.
I guess the other advantage is too with these slow flies, I take for granted that I can just throttle up 80% and give whatever plane I'm flying a very light toss just to get momentum started, like the Spitfire. I throttle up, I give it a light toss, and it's gone. It's
right.
in the air, it's flying. It has some. Every plane's going to have some interesting like hand launch tendencies, where it's going to cut one direction, or it's going to nose out, or it's going to nose like whatever your particular plane's tendencies are.
Mm-hmm.
If you're aware of them, you kind of correct for it and you go. But like, I've not had any plane that I couldn't throttle up and give it a light little toss and it be flying. And I guess if I had a high pitch on there, that would be a little more difficult to achieve, is what you're saying?
Right. You may not have as quick an acceleration. Like it may be cutting through the air, but it just isn't pulling it any. It's not getting up to full speed, like forward momentum wise, as fast. It's not going to react on a dime. It's not going to get you there immediately, because remember the higher pitch, they tend to be thinner blades. Part of that has to do with it only moves so much air. We'll talk about the trade-off between diameter and air movement and how much a motor, and then we talked about it in the motors. Like basically motors only produce X amount of watts. They only produce so much power, and you're that's what you're kind of pulling through the air. And I'm jumbling this up a little bit, but I think when we get to the end of it, if you guys still have questions, by all means, write it in. We'd love to clarify it for you. Hopefully we'll get it cleared as we go. I think it might, when we talk about how we select propellers, like how to select them for your plane. But so when you finish thinking about the props, think about like the difference in screw threads. Like if you have a fine screw thread, that's essentially like a slow fly prop. Like every turn just kind of slowly gets it in there, and it doesn't take a ton of power to get it. It's just easy to get it in and through. Whereas like an aggressive thread or a low thread count, a coarse thread, you just turn it and it's like driving right in, but you got to put a lot of effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to need a bigger motor for a higher pitch with the same speeds. Again, this is where the delicate balance begins when you're looking at your plane and you're trying to figure out, well, what motor system, what power system, what prop, and they all kind of interlink, right? So let's, and the other thing I want to talk about is there is such a thing as variable pitch props, especially in some of the more expensive models and some of the more advanced planes when you're talking about you've got a gasser and it's swinging like a 2-foot prop. You may be able to get it with a variable pitch, and basically has a collet that moves in and out. And when it does, it's connected to the pitch, the back of the blade, and it basically controls the pitch. So as it moves in and out along the shaft, it changes the pitch from low to high or vice versa. And think about it like if you ever have seen a helicopter, those are variable pitch props. And they can go all the way from negative to positive. So they can literally push the plane or push the helicopter into the ground or send it shooting off into the sky.
Mm-hmm.
So So that I think covers what I need to talk about with pitch. So I guess let's talk now about kind of how you might want to select your propeller. And really, a lot of people kind of talk about, say, oh, I've got this engine. Let me select a prop based on that. Like what you really want to do is you want to look at the kind of aircraft you have and match the propeller to that aircraft, right? For example, if you're going to put a racing propeller on a World War I like biplane aircraft, you're going to really limit the model. Like that model is designed for a slower, like it's never going to be going terribly fast. It's a biplane. There's a lot of drag, and you're going to need the kind of grab that that slow fly prop that we're talking about, like it can accelerate a lot faster. You're going to need that.
Yeah, because if you're trying to run a, I guess a speedster type prop on it, it may not be able to overcome the drags you're talking about. Say with the bigger, bulkier wings, and you may not actually ever get up to decent fly speed. Where a slow fly is going to be able to bite the air proper the way it should. Right. It's intended to fly at those speeds, and it'll. Am I making sense with that?
You are. And I think the biggest thing with the World War I aircraft is there's a smaller flight window, like full speed to low speed. You want a lot of fine control, which you're not going to get with a high pitch, low small chord prop kind of deal. And having that fine control is going to be really important in the World War I type aircrafts. But on the other side of that, right? The early warbirds, they're going to have a bunch of airframe drag that the propeller will never come close, so it'll never live up to its potential. It's just never going to be like screaming through the sky. And for example, like we fly the Spitfires, right? And they're a lot of fun. And again, I love having the slow flight props on them, but there are occasions where it's flying beautiful and all I want to do is scream across the runway. Like I just want to go zero, and I'm like, yeah, full tilt. And it's going like it's going as fast as the propeller will let it, right?
Yeah.
And it won't. There's no way to have it get any faster. And the answer is we really should be flying something a little bit more aggressive on those planes. And one of the things, speaking of that, we fly electric, you and I. It's interesting that there are propellers that are marked E. They're designed for that high torque delivery that only an electric motor can give. The instantaneous torque. And so they're designed to cope with that and use it to its advantage. So it'll have a really thick kind of base. If you look at APC props, especially the ones that are marked E, they'll have a thicker base and they'll feather out. And so that you can take advantage of that instant torque that electric motors can give. So if you have an electric motor, by all means, grab an electric pop. It might be fun to kind of compare the two. You will see a performance difference. I noticed when I did, I was like, oh, okay, ooh, this is nice. It's a lot more responsive.
You've flown non-electric props on your electric planes?
Well, if you think about it this way, those the slow fly props, the 10x47s or 9x47s or whatever, those are not like electric props specifically, right? But if you look at those gray APC ones, I don't have one here to show you. But if you look,
I know which one you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. That has a thicker base, and it's designed, and it's got the way it's kind of curved and biting into the air. It's set up to take advantage of that instant torque, like straight out, and it performs better. Like I can feel it. It's more responsive than a slow fly, which is still pretty good. It's just they tend to come at a little bit higher prop pitch too. By the same token, of course, like we want to using too slow of a prop, like a low pitch on a model that's intended to go fast, will prevent the plane from really gaining enough speed in some of the cases to fly at all. Like if I put a slow fly prop on one of those, like a jet that has very small wings, very low lift wings, and they're designed, they've got to be screaming before they really get into the air.
Right.
it may never even really take off the ground. So, pay attention to what you're putting your prop onto, and match the prop pitch to the kind of plane you're going to fly. And then from there, look at the motors. The motors will often have like a range of propellers that they're designed for. Let's say the CPAC motor is designed for either like a 9.6 or a 10, a 10 slow flight prop, or even an 11x3, right? So that's like kind of a range, and you kind of want to keep near that for it to perform properly. So it'll give you like an amp rating that it's going to pull through the motor with those given props. So those kind of give you your ballparks.
And I remember we saw some of the symptoms of not having the right prop for what you're doing early in the Spitfire. It was actually, I think, the first time we took my Spitfire out, I was still flying on my BPAC, and I borrowed your 4-cell battery for one of those flights, but I never changed the prop. I was still running my 9x4.5 or 10x4.5.
I think it's 9x6.
Whatever. Huh?
I thought it was a 9x6.
Well, it's my slow flies that I'm flying on.
Okay, then it'd be a 4.5.
But I never changed the prop. I just slapped the other motor or the other battery, so I went from a 3 to a 4-cell. And that motor specifically says if you're going to a 4-cell, you gotta change your prop out. And I remember after I nosed into the ground and broke the prop, that I remember picking it up and feeling that motor, and that motor was cooking. Just because I was running the wrong prop on it. It was
right.
a larger prop than it should have been swinging at that rate or at that cell count, and it just started overheating the motor.
Right, and if we remember back to our motor episode, the motor rating is basically revolutions per minute per volt. Right. So when you add another cell, you're adding close to 4 volts, let's say, or 3 to 4 volts. And when you do, you're increasing the revolutions per minute. You're speeding up the motor by that much.
Any number of thousands of RPMs. Yeah,
exactly. And so that means that prop is now biting through the air more, like it's pulling more air, and it's demanding more work from the motor, which the motor is going to try to do. And by doing so, it's going to, we talked about it, it's going to basically always lag a little bit because it can't quite get the full speed or the full rotations. It's constantly trying to catch up to the speed you're trying to put it at. And the prop isn't made for it, right? The motor doesn't have enough oomph in your case, right? In the previous one. So that difference is creating heat because the motor's never really getting where it's supposed to be. It's generating resistive magnetic fields, and those fields are resisting the changes even more, which is creating additional heat.
Okay. Not to count the added with the increased current that the motor is drawing, trying to get to where
there's that too. Well, it's actually less, right? So if you have more voltage, you have more oomph trying to turn the motor, you need less current to do that.
That's true.
Right, because it's still the same wattage. That motor is still a X amount watt, let's say a 300 watt motor. If you increase the volts going in, you're decreasing the amperage. So one of the ways people try to create long range flying motors is they basically dump a ton of voltage in and have a very low amperage rating. And so they have 12 cell, but it's like very, very low capacity. And they'll be able to run that for a long time because they won't be pulling as many amps through. It's a balance. I mean, the whole thing is a balance act. Really, you're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul somewhere along the way. The best thing is to look at the motor manufacturer and see where their optimal wattage usage is and try to stick with what they recommend for the most part. But as you and I have both found out, sometimes we want to go a little bit faster, or we want to put it in a different cell count or something. So there is a rule of thumb out there that is really helpful for new pilots. And honestly, if you haven't heard it, then for old pilots, it's basically a 1-to-1 trade ratio. So if you're given, like, this is optimal at a 9x6 prop, right? You can trade either 1 inches of diameter. So it's like a 1-to-1 trade. So you can trade the 1 inch diameter for 1 inch pitch. So if you want more pitch, you can decrease the diameter by 1. So borrow from one to put into the other. Or if you want a bigger prop and you can reduce the pitch by 1.
Okay.
And so you can kind of trade those back and forth. And you can go pretty far in either direction. Again, and that'll work on that same kind of motor system without really overloading it. And what you're doing is, if you've either put too much volts in it, you're going to do what we talked about. You're going to heat up the motor itself. Now, if you're going the opposite, where you're doing crazy pitch, what you're going to do is that motor is going to try to pull as many amps as it can through that motor, and it may be more than the ESC can handle. The motor, by increasing or by changing the pitch improperly, you're going to then burn out the ESC, right? And so either way, that's why you want to kind of trade it. So you always want to have roughly this. And so essentially, you're trading how much air this propeller is biting in through and pushing past it for how much of a diameter is it going to affect, right? So you're trading one for the other, because ultimately when you do the math, they come out really close. And so you're effectively loading the motor almost the same. What you're doing is getting different characteristics of flight, faster but less responsive as far as being able to speed up and slow down, and that's the motor, the plane itself speeding up and slowing down. Whereas like the slow fly stuff, like you get a lot better fine control, but you're never going to get very fast, relatively speaking.
If I understand correctly, that 1-to-1 trade-off really works for just 1 inch in either direction. You can go more than 1 inch in either direction and continue that ratio. But if after you cross that 1 inch threshold, you kind of head for the 2 and the 3 inch, like you really start losing that ratio formulation begins breaking down, and it's not accurate anymore.
Right. Yeah. That's important. Yeah, that's a good point. I usually, if you're looking at a motor that's sized enough to pull a certain motor, your plane is about that size anyway. If you go too much smaller, you're probably not going to clear the fuse. Or if you go crazy big, there's no pitch to it, and it's not really going anywhere anyway. And like that's where you run into it can't move the plane fast enough to get it in the air.
Now, do you happen to know how that 1-to-1 trade works with more than 2 blades on a prop? Is it still a 1-to-1 per?
So, okay, I don't know if there's a rule of thumb. No, I don't really know. I know that I think as you increase blades, you're going to pull more amps through the motor. That's what I do know. So I've got let's say most motors are set up for a 2 or 3 blade prop. If you go to 4 or 5, you almost want to bring it down an inch of pitch for every blade you add, or assume an extra like 10% of amperage is going to pull through that. So if you're running it on, let's say it's pulling 20 amps, you've got a 30 amp motor, you can probably add an extra thing, and you might bring it up to 25. Add an extra blade, going to go up to 25. So instead of doing 3, you go to 4. It'll probably still work. If you go to a 5 blade prop, that's where you might start getting a little iffy. Honestly, the best way is get a big honking ESC, get the propeller you want, and test it. Like get an amp meter, and test how much current is going through at each thing, and look at the values. You can also, there's a couple websites out there that have like, here's the motor and here's every prop we could find, and these are the stats. It'll give you thrust and things. And I'll see if we can find a link before we go. I know a guy who uses it. I think it's like eCalc. There's more to it. I'll find it, and it'll be in. So look for it in the show notes. But basically, it has like all the test data that they could find. So they'll have a popular motor or a motor that somebody sent them to test, and they'll have like every prop that they have that's roughly sized for it. And then you'll be able to see the differences because it's interesting. Some propellers are stiffer, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Maybe why you might select different materials is stiffer. I guess produces additional thrust at the cost of current, and flexible tends to have like and again, stiffer tends to be like responsive. But the more flexible, so maybe a thinner propeller is going to flex more. And so when you gun it, it's not going to immediately react. It's actually going to be a softer change, which may be good and it may be bad. I had one where I didn't like it. I mean, it really was like, what is this even doing? This is terrible. And because remember, as your lift is perpendicular to the direction of travel, right? So if your propeller is flexing inward as it lifts because it's not as firm, the lift vectors are going to start pointing towards the shaft, which means not as much as actually going toward, you're losing thrust or losing the lift from the blade. And so as it flexes, you're missing out on thrust.
Well, we also found that there was a bit of a trade-off there, just as far as props breaking. The stiffer props that I had that I originally got in that box that I had picked up from you, the stiffer blades seemed to break at every little opportunity. Yeah. Whereas the ones that were a little more flexible that I had and that I bought more of them, they seem to survive rougher impacts better. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll definitely see that. And that really goes to when we start getting into materials. So, I mean, why don't we talk about that? And I'll tell you what, probably the biggest advance in durability of blades that I could tell, especially for the 5-inch size and 7-inch, is the quadcopter industry has really demanded a far more durable prop. And nowadays, if I fly with a F or APAC, the 2204 or the 1806 motors, I'm flying a 5-inch prop. It's usually 5x3. That's a typical quadcopter propeller. Sorry, a 5x4, 5x3 prop. So 5-inch, 4.5-inch prop pitch, and 3 blades. Those I don't have to replace them. Like I replace them only because like the tips are damaged, but the blade is never they never break. Like they're just stupid durable. It's fantastic. I know the ability to create a durable prop becomes increasingly difficult as you get bigger diameter because you're dealing with different forces. Anyway, so out there, as far as I know, and I know you could probably name whatever exotic highfalutin material, and there's probably a prop made out of it. But like for the smaller motors, plastic. So for the 5-inch or less, I mean, you're looking at plastic or fiber reinforced nylon. Now, as I understand it, there are nylon props out there, and a lot of people say that they're just not durable. Which is typically, I think, why they're fiberglass reinforced. And then, of course, there's fiberglass props, fiber reinforced plastics. There's carbon fiber. And, of course, the traditional propellers are made out of wood. You know, I think, what is it? There's a whole list I found. It's like ash, beech, oak, that kind of thing. Anything that has a pretty even grain. So oak really isn't. Oak is really strong, but it may not necessarily be the best because it tends to have. It's not as the. Hold on, let me pull on my woodworker's cap. So you have there's a distinct ring differences. So the actual striations of the wood are noticeable, whereas like a beech and an ash tend to be a lot smoother. So the densities of the wood rings tend to be more even, whereas oak tends to be different. Anyway, they're all good. As I understand it, they generally are serviceable. If they're making a prop out of this material wood, it's likely worth making a prop out of that.
Can we get wooden props in our size?
Yeah. Yeah, go hobby shops sell them. I think they go from 5-inch on up. Usually they tend to be for the bigger motors. When you're looking at like 9 inches or 8 inches on up, is tend to be where wood seems to make sense. So when you get the small stuff, I mean, you can produce a 5-inch plastic prop for pennies on the dollar, and whereas a wood is, even if it's done all CNC and whatnot, it's still going to take a while. Like it's going to take some money.
Yeah, but if I could get like a 9-inch, like one of my slow flies in a wood, I almost wouldn't mind trying that sometime.
Yeah, go ahead. And that's kind of where it comes into when you're doing that, though. As you check some of these different materials, what you'll notice is that they tend to be made for different motors. Like some are made for gas, and typically wood is made for gas motors. And I think it's because of the way gas tends to respond, and there's a lot more vibrations, and certain materials handle vibrations better than others.
Right.
So I'm just trying to think. So that might be a bigger play as you start getting into bigger propellers. They're going to be made for different motor systems. Electric tends to have very little vibrations built into the system. Like when you're looking at a gasser or a nitro or even a turbine, like there's a lot more vibration going on there. So let's see. So I guess when you look at stiffer materials, it tends to be a firmer throttle curve. So it's going to match your stick movement better.
Right, because you're not getting that prop flex.
Right, exactly. And then the more flexible will be a more softer transition. I think we can talk about hubs, and then we'll go back to the blade end treatments. If there's anything there's not a ton to be talking about there, but there's some interesting things going on. So the hubs, one of the big things you want to double check is to make sure that the motor shaft is going to match your propeller, or that the propeller, even if it doesn't match, they have like oftentimes the plastic ones or the fiber reinforced nylon will have a ring set. It's basically like a casting of like 8 different rings, and basically you match the ring to match your hub perfectly, and all of them, the outer diameter of that ring is set perfectly to fit inside the inner diameter in set in the propeller itself. So they'll match up, and that way you can guarantee that your propeller, no matter what motor you're putting it on, will fit the shaft perfecly.
Yeah, I learned about that one the hard way.
Yeah. So tell us what happened.
It was when I discovered that the motor I have is actually a quadcopter motor, and not say an actual airplane motor. But with it being a quadcopter motor, and I picked up airplane props, the props would not fit on the shaft. I was actually having to take my hobby knife and kind of bore that out a little bit, which can result in a bit of off-centeredness, which you'll talk about balancing in a few, but it can cause balancing issues. So every time I wanted to change a prop, I was having to spend a few minutes and bore out the hub to be able to fit on my motor shaft. So now that I've got the proper, I made sure that I bought quadcopter props, and that then came with the rings that I needed that had the right size to fit.
Yeah, then everything worked out. Yeah. And that's really, it's not always, as a new guy, that's not something people explain too well. I kind of was like, what in the heck are these things for? I'm like, it fits close enough on the shaft. And of course, there's a little bit of slop, and I wasn't thinking about it. And then I started thinking, wait a second, this thing's going to be spinning at 4,000. It's going to be, geez, that's going to go awful fast. I guess this better be dead right, which is true, I know the motor shafts that we tend to fly, you and I, range from like 3 millimeters up to like 6 when you're starting to get into the bigger stuff, where it's going to swing 12 to 16-inch propeller. I don't think I've seen anything, like I've never personally seen anything in my workshop that's bigger than that. I don't have any motors that are big enough to swing anything bigger than that. I've seen them. They're cool, dangerous looking, scary mostly. But you'll find that a lot of the traditional RC, 3-foot or 4-foot planes tend to be running off of a 3 1/4 inch shaft, 3.17, which is an 1/8 inch shaft material, or it's a 4 or 5 because it's a quadcopter motor, 4 or 5 millimeter shafts.
No, mine was too big to get a prop saver for. The prop saver would not have fit on the end of my shaft.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's interesting about, that's one of the options that you can have, and we'll talk about that in a second. But prop savers are pretty neat, neat little devices. Okay, so let's go back to blade end treatments here. So one of the things you'll notice is that the blade width tends to be thinner when you get into high RPM or high speed propellers, and they tend to be wider for lower RPMs. And that's
we're talking about the cord on these?
Yeah, the cord of the airfoil.
Okay.
And so just keep in mind, like when you see a thin prop, it's typically designed to go on a very fast motor. And then you have the end treatments. They range. For the most part, they're kind of just like a standard paddle, almost like you'd have like a paddle in a canoe. Sometimes they're almost like they're cut straight off and they're a bull nose. So it goes out to the end and it stops. And so sometimes they're even a scimitar knife edge. So they kind of turn to the rear. And what that does is it actually encourages the vortex shedding to happen at a very specific point. Because remember, these are airfoils. So these are working exactly like wings. So at the end of the propeller, you have the air on the bottom that has a different pressure than the top. As it skids off the end of the propeller blade, they're trying to match up. They're rotating around the edge. And then as they do that, they basically slide off the back too, and it ends up creating this rotational vortices off the tip.
Okay.
And the more, I guess, aggressive that vortices, that's loss, right? That's thrust that didn't get that's motor energy that didn't get translated into thrust. And it also is a parasitic drag and a couple other things. But they're trying to find ways to minimize what that is. And that's been the time-honored conundrum of most every wing designer since we started making them, I guess. And there's been a couple things where they'll come to a very fine knife edge that kind of curls back. I've seen some that actually have a tip that comes up, kind of like airlines. They'll have like that little winglet that comes up. I've seen propellers that have a little winglet on them, which very interesting. I don't know if I haven't noticed any differences. It gets really kind of weird. But most of the time you're going to be, do you want a bull nose? Do you want the scimitar, which is kind of a slightly curved, very thin blade, almost like a knife, like a sword blade or something, or the standard paddle, like a slow fly paddle? And you just kind of look at it and you see. I think we've talked about a bunch of different options, but I think before we do, probably the last like super important thing that I want to make sure that our listeners are aware is prop balancing. Is most of the time they come out of the factory well balanced, and that basically means that no matter what direction you have your blades oriented, they won't sink to one side or the other.
Okay, why don't you explain a setup for balancing? Because you just went straight into that. What are you hanging it on?
Okay, so basically you're putting a blade on a thin shaft. You can even probably, put it on like a wire, that like a control wire, something like that. But
string, maybe.
Yeah, string. The problem is that's going to be off center from the blade. So when you're looking at proper prop balancers, they're actually two cones that kind of push into either side of the prop. And then in those cones in the center of them is that shaft coming out. And then that you put on basically like a collar that sits it up high enough where the blades can rotate freely. And then basically you put the blade where you think it should and you just let it go. And if it stays where it is, it's probably balanced. Then you kind of rotate it to a different position and then check it again. Now, if one blade tends to dip down, no matter which way you put the, put the starting position, that blade is the heavier blade, and you need to typically what they'll do is either take a piece of tape, like cellophane tape. I mean, we're talking very little weight is actually needed. And you basically start it by putting it out at the edge, and you can move it in. If you're too much at the edge, you can move it in, and you're basically creating less balancing force it's still the same weight, but it's not as far out. Anyway, you put it on the back side of the prop because you want the top side, which is where the airflow and the lift is created primarily. You want that to be as smooth as possible. So you don't want to put the tape on the top, you want to put it on the bottom. But basically then you check it, see if it balances. If it doesn't, you either add more tape or maybe move it in. And then you basically get it so that no matter what direction you put the motors, like let's say you put it at 3 and 9 or not 3 and 9 o'clock, or now I'm going to have to memorize so 1 and 7 or whatever, whatever you leave it at.
They're 6 apart, Matthew.
I know. That's more math than I want to do right now. Anyway, so no matter where you leave it, it stays there. And when you've done that, it's properly balanced. So when you put it on a plane, and the big piece with that is that if it isn't balanced, it creates, and it could be awful to the point where it kind of pulls your whole plane apart. It'll create vibrations. Remember, this thing is spinning really, 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 really fast. So any little imbalance is going to show up in vibrational force in the motor. It'll loosen your screws. Even if you have Loctite, I think it'll still kind of work at those. If you're working with foam board like we are, it's going to shake the snot out of that foam board, and it's going to try to basically rip apart your plane and weaken your glue joints. So, maybe delaminate some paper. Who knows? It can wreak havoc on a plane and tear it apart pretty quick. So it's really important that you, most of the time they come out of the factory fine, but it's not hard to check, and it's worth checking every time.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I'll have to figure out a way to set up a balancing tool here so I can start checking mine.
You might be able to get away with a pen cap. You know what I mean? Put it in the one end and put a shaft in there. It's about the same, and that might get you close enough to what you need. Okay. Maybe. Well, it's worth checking out, because if there's a cheap way to do it, sweet. I'm sure there is a 3D printed option. If you have it, they're relatively inexpensive if you go on a store like Hobby King or any hobby store. Local hobby stores will probably have one, just to have there so that you can buy one.
I know Chris had like a magnetic one, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. He might have, yeah. And that means that way you don't have to screw anything together. You just sort of clip it almost. Okay. And then I think the other thing is just to talk about some of the options that are available for different kinds of propellers or different kind of operations you might have on your plane. So let's talk about them really quick. One of the neat things is prop savers. It's basically like a collet with 2 screws that stick out, proud of the collet. And you tighten them down until they're tight on the shaft and they don't rotate. But you put the propeller, and then the collet fits directly inside your standard propeller. So the propeller sits dead center on the shaft and flat on the top of the collet. And then you put a rubber band over top. And that goes out past the shaft and around to the other screw. And what that does is, as the motor torques, that rubber band is going to pull the propeller with it, right? It's going to pull the propeller. But if you're flying along and you hit the ground, that the end of the tip of the blade is going to pull under the craft, but the rubber band will allow it to rotate. And so it'll
Right.
save your prop from breaking. That's normally what causes your propellers to break when you're flying. It's not from a rotational force into the ground. It's typically because the blade tip hits the ground and tries to pull under and break that way. So the prop saver allows the prop to just basically kind of come off the shaft and not break, which means you can go fly some more on the same prop and not have it break. You might break some O-rings. Sometimes they're not rubber bands. They're typically O-rings, which are a little bit more durable, but they break, and I'd rather have those break. They're very cheap than a prop. So let's see, prop savers. We did that. Quick release hubs. That's something that the quadcopter industry. One of the things with quadcopters, if you do bust it, oftentimes you're going to bust like 3 or 4 of them at once. And if you're doing a lot of tricks, you may end up doing them into a brick building a lot. Mm-hmm. And so every time you do that, you're likely to break every one of your propellers. So some of the companies are trying to find ways to do quick release prop nuts and things like that. So you don't have to, you basically like push a plunger down and you can put the prop and the hub down in, and then you release it, and then it's firmly attached to the quad.
Huh.
So that's something that they've been trying to figure out a good way to do. Spinners are popular on planes. They're basically like a front nose cone. And what that does is it kind of creates an aerodynamic center around the center of the hub. And it looks a lot cooler. It sticks out from the nose. I'm not really sure why they're there. People love them. I've yet to see why. Other than it looks really cool. It does look good.
Yeah, you paint a spiral on it, and
exactly. Yeah, you could do that. Again, it's on full-size aircraft. If you're looking for scale, a spinner's probably where you're going to go. And they're made out of all sorts of material. They're made out of aluminum. They're made out of plastic. I'm sure there's some fiberglass ones. I don't know, 3D printed. You could 3D print yours. You can actually 3D print props for that matter. I might add. I don't know if I trust it.
I'd want to.
Yeah, I would hate to have that like spin up to 8,000 RPMs and have it come to pieces on me. But I mean, some people, I'll have to give that a shot, and if I do, I will let you know. I will probably test it behind a thick glass barrier as I hide behind a corner with a video and just see how it works.
I'd be curious to know if that ends up being any cheaper than just buying the prop.
I think technically, yes, because the plastic you're getting at like 2 cents. Like for all the plastic you'd use in the prop, it's like 2 cents of material. So don't forget you have the props. You'll always have a reverse prop. So basically one that would be used for counter rotating props. Or in a quadcopter, you basically have opposite motors are running the opposite directions, right?
Yeah.
Folding props. Now, this is one that's really useful for. There are two different kinds of folding props. If you are running a quadcopter and you want it to fold up really small, you want those because that's like the biggest piece of your quad. If you can fold them together and kind of push them against the body of the quad, now your quad is compact and can fit in a backpack really easy.
Yeah,
because you can use the rotational force of the motor. Once it's sped up, for that'll basically sling the blade straight out, and you'll have all the lifting force you want. So that's how a lot of the quadcopter ones work. If you're good, I guess not good. If you're interested in gliding, one of the biggest parts of the drag of a glider is the propeller. So if you have a prop-driven glider, you get it up to altitude and you want to cut the motor and just glide. Well, you lose a lot. There's a lot of drag in having the prop out. So if you have a prop when it's stopped, folds back, as the plane pushes through the air, the props fold back out of the way, reduce the drag. And then when you want to go again, you just spin up the motor. And then again, that centrifugal force will fling the blades back out into position. perpendicular to the shaft, and then it'll do its job. And they basically have a toggle for 90 degrees. Like it can't go past 90 degrees forward. It'll just go straight out.
Yeah. And I guess the key there is to make sure that if you're going to do one of those folding props on the glider, to make sure that your motor sits. I guess with a glider it would, but make sure your motor sits far enough in advance of your wing that it's not going to like try to hit the wing as it's doing those initial rotations to get the prop blades, spun back out.
Right. Yeah. I don't think I've seen a glider that has such a short coupled nose. Oftentimes they need at least a decent distance where it's going to balance right.
Yeah.
Because they're pretty, the back ends are usually pretty long. So that way the tail surfaces can be really small, reducing the drag. And by having that way out there, you can move, the whole fuselage is a little bit further.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm, that's part of why the tails are so long on gliders, as I understand it. I could be very wrong. But
yeah, because little inputs are amplified over the distance for the moments.
And the bigger the surface, the more drag you have. And gliding is all about reducing the drag for lift. Right. So you can go as far as you possibly can on the energy you have. So those are two reasons. I've also seen like the Tony the Tiger, the FT Explorer, which is basically a pusher prop that sits up behind the wing, and then you have like a body and then like a tail that kind of comes back underneath the prop. I've seen that done as a pusher prop or a folding prop. So basically, as it's spinning, it's doing its normal thing, but when it's done, it folds back up because the Explorer is a really good glider. Matter of fact, I think it's almost a better glider than it is just a regular plane. At least in my experience. I mean, everybody has a different one. And then one of the things I'll call it new, but it isn't new in the sense that helicopters have been using this for a while, but basically lit props. So when you're doing a nighttime flying, you need to be able to see the disc of your helicopter to be able to understand what in the world is it doing. So there's a number of pre-made, lit propellers so that you have a bunch of LEDs kind of punctuated down the line of one of the blades or even both. And then as it spins, it creates a disc of light so you can see where things are at. Quadcopters are looking to figure out a way to do that on a smaller scale, because when you're doing the indoor races, they're usually in dark areas that are like black lit with like lights and lit gateways and stuff. But the quads themselves are like, other than the LEDs they put on the actual quad itself, they're these like colored hunks blasting through the air. What you're not seeing is the actual disc of the rotor, right? So if they can find a way to light that, then you really kind of get a good sense as to how close those guys are coming to clipping some of the gates and things like that. Also, if you're doing nighttime flying with planes, having the disc of your plane motor would be pretty cool, or the propeller.
I can't get my head around the engineering needed to get power through the motor, through the shaft, out to the prop. Like
it's oftentimes just a little LED like a little button battery.
Oh,
that's balanced out. And that button battery you plug in and you go, okay, it's lit. Let's go. And off you go.
Well, now I feel like an idiot.
No, I had the same thought. I'm like, I wonder, are they going to have like a brush, like kind of touching the inside of the, like a little, how we just, that's really delicate. You're right. That is going to be, no, they do have a couple, and I'm like, okay, I'm apparently overthinking this. On the quadcopter motors, they basically put the button batteries right over the shaft. And so that, I guess I don't know. They worked it out. One of the, was it Rotor Riot? They have a video. Look for it. Lit LEDs, or I don't know. You'll find it. It's pretty neat. It's just one of those things. Like when you think about like, well, what can we do? Like, what are the new things of this hobby? Well, for example, one of the things that people have been trying, there's like two different kinds of. So somebody looked at how humpback whales have nubs along the front edge of their fins, like their front fins. They have all these nubs, and you're like, what in the world is that for? Because like nothing else has it. Well, it turns out somebody did a study and it reduced the drag along the front edge and created basically vortices that created pockets of air, almost like the KFM wing, where you think like, oh, there'd be a ton of drag, but instead it actually creates like a pocket so that air can flow smoothly over top of that pocket, right? It's doing the same thing along the front edge of this thing. So somebody made wind turbine blades that are based off of whale limbs. Anyway, they increase efficiency by like 5 or 6% or something like that. I could see somebody trying to basically do this with airplane propellers and see if they can make the propellers that much more efficient, because efficiency equals longer flight times and less fuel, right? Less cost to use it. And vice versa here. We just use less battery to do what we want, which would be pretty cool. Somebody also tried, I think it's a Korea Aurora, and they tried something that nobody else had, I guess, tried. They created, I'll call it radial fins along the blade. And I guess the idea is as the blade spins through the air, it stops slippage along the blade. And the ribs kind of redirect it to be in line with, I guess, the direction of airflow or something, direction of prop flow.
Okay.
And they claim that's going to, it's 5 or 10% more efficient. A couple people who've tested it that I saw, Josh Birdwell being one, he's got a video on it. He said he didn't really notice a big difference. It didn't show up in anything that he could really measure. It didn't feel any better or worse. So I think it just ended up making it a little bit heavier and a little less durable. Because it has a different sections, so it's thicker and thinner and thicker and thinner, so it's more apt to break at one of those spots, I guess. So I don't know. It's just one of those. I think it's interesting how people are trying to innovate.
Yeah,
like,
and
okay,
I mean,
it's
that's,
like we say we know it all, but have we really checked it?
Yeah, and you don't know until you try. And sometimes you just try something. It's like, I don't know. Let's try it, and then it works or it doesn't.
Well, right. Oh, well, for example, and I'm surprised this hasn't happened on an airplane yet, but putting dimples on a golf ball makes it fly further because there's less drag, right? The Mythbusters did that to a car, and they found a 14% increase in fuel efficiency.
Really?
Yes. So I could see somebody trying that somewhere in aviation.
Well, time for me to go outside and take a hammer to my Prius real quick.
Oh, God, Joe, please don't. Study up on golf ball dimples first, at least.
My wife and the bank would kill me.
Yeah, right. Oh, my God. But, I mean, that kind of concludes the rundown on props. For the most part, we just grab the one that the motor says will work, and we fly, and it's a good time. But there's clearly more to it, and understanding those things might help you make smarter choices depending on the mission that you have for the craft you build.
Okay. And any sort of resources you know of, you're going to put some links in the show notes we can include.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple articles that I read through really quick that I thought had some good overview information and some good diagrams that are useful to have on hand when you're thinking about it. I'm also going to put the calculator. It's basically a prop motor calculator website. And I think that those should be what we need for our listeners and for ourselves to go back and reference. So I guess that brings us to the workbench, right? What are we going to work on next?
I've still got the Corsair that only has the top half of the wings put on. So I get to continue working on that.
Okay.
That's about all I got right now.
Well, that's okay. I mean, that'll probably take you for a couple weeks. I mean, it's not a simple build. Not that it's like super complex, but I know it's one you're going to want to take time doing. Plus, you're also going to want to paint, and both of those things are going to take some time.
Yeah,
to get it
I
the way you
want
want.
to. When I go to paint, I want to make sure I spend the proper time and get it right. And I may have to look into the was it polyacrylic. For once it's done being painted, then I can kind of do a poly coat over the top just to kind of seal it and get a nice sheen on it and super smooth. And although I'm curious how it's going to interact with a hinge in the control surfaces.
It's a spray paint, so probably not much at all.
Okay.
Well,
what about you?
You can. I was gonna say you could probably take like the white glue, and just to cover the foam so it doesn't get eaten, and then it'll dry out, so it'll be light.
Yeah, I didn't really notice that the spray paint was eating my foam.
Okay.
When I was spraying, but I wasn't doing like heavy coats.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, light coats shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I think it took me like 3 coats to get a proper good coat of paint on it on the Spitfire when I was doing that. So
yeah, good, cool.
What about you? What's on your bench?
Well, I want to finish. I want to get the 250 gram build up in the air. I'm curious to see how the Zodlight Copilot works. The Copilot Light. I want to see how that works. I want to get Dusty up in the air. I want to paint him. I'm going to have a lot of fun making him look pretty, making him look like the duster in the sky. And I think I'll probably, Build Rory is coming up. By the end of the month, I better have 4 planes ready to go. Otherwise, I don't know if I'll make it through the month. But I think before I do, I want to finish. I know I had damaged remember I nosed the glider in going at like 100 miles an hour because I never pulled out of the dive.
That's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I basically put it on a shelf and said, maybe I'll come back to it. I heard another RC podcast talking about their gliders and things. I'm like, oh yeah, gliders would be nice to have, to like be able to just pull out and just enjoy. Especially, I've got the pieces to the head tracker, like a head tracker that'll go on you could just place it on your goggle and it'll then pass along the information so you could have a pan and tilt on your plane. So I was thinking that would be the perfect starter platform for a pan and tilt, truly. So I was like, yeah, maybe I should get that up and running. Like, I just need to pull it down, see what's missing. I don't think it's much. I really think it's 1 or 2 hinge pieces, and then I think it's back in action.
Okay.
So I think we're going to work on those 3 things. And then we'll see. Obviously that's the idea, but we'll see.
All right. Well, that's pretty much gonna do it for this one. Again, next time we're going to be having our 1-year anniversary, so we'll be talking about our last year in the hobby and the year in the podcast. So if you guys have any questions related to that or anything really, feel free to email us and ask us about it. We'd love to discuss it next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you'd like to see in the coming year. This coming episode is not going to be just us looking back in the past year, but it's looking back and then looking forward, and thinking about what we want to do in the future. And we would absolutely love your input. It's really important. I mean, we're doing this podcast because we're hoping, and we know it is a little bit at least, helping some of our listeners. If you're listening, hopefully you're getting something out of this. And I want to make sure that in this coming year, we continue to do that.
Absolutely.
Your help would be super important.
All right. Well, Matthew, if there's nothing else.
Nope. Not on my end.
All right.
You.
That's it. We're going to get out of here. We'll see y'all next time.
All right. See you next time. Bye.